of In Conversation program. Can you hear us okay? A thumbs up? Brilliant, thank you. The In Conversation series is a program undertaken each fortnight to keep South Australian tourism businesses and stakeholders engaged and informed as we move our way through COVID-19 crisis and into recovery. My name is Sean De Bruin, and I'm the CEO of the South Australian Tourism Industry Council here in South Australia, which is the peak body for the tourism industry. Good morning, it's great to have so many of you joining us today, and today is the 2nd of September for those people that view a recording after today's session. Today we are featuring the Adelaide Airport and are joined by Managing Director Mark Young and his counterpart Jonathan Cheong, who is Head of Aviation and Business Development. Before I hand over to Mark and Jonathan, just a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphones on mute. We very much invite you to use the chat room to make comments and ask questions. Mark and Jonathan will be more than happy to answer questions and respond to any comments that people have at the end of the presentation. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to Mark and Jonathan.
Thank you, Sean, and good morning, everybody. I'd just like to thank TIXA for the opportunity to speak with you today and outline a few things in relation to Adelaide Airport. Our presentation today, basically 3 parts. Our achievements pre-COVID, what the COVID shock has meant to us as a business and implications for the state, and what our recovery plan is, or our flight track, as we call it, to aviation recovery. There will be a question and answer session at the end, and we'll try and leave plenty of time for questions. Before we start the presentation formal, I thought it may be of interest to all just to understand what we are doing as a business in terms of keeping passengers and staff and other stakeholders here at the airport, and in particular the terminal, keeping them safe. And it's all about providing a level of confidence to the travelling passengers around health safety. Safety as an airport is always paramount, and we see our response to the health response as just being an extension of our normal safe working practices. So we have the appropriate social distancing markers throughout the terminal, reminders throughout the terminal, both visual and over PA around social distancing, frequent cleaning on all of our high main touch points such as lift buttons, escalators, check-in counters and kiosks, sneeze screens for areas where there is time, 15 minutes or more contact with any member of staff by passenger, for instance at our help desks, cleaning of our toilets every 20 minutes, and our regular deep cleaning cycle of things such as the security trays, as well as providing the opportunity for people to self-clean the trays if they choose to, and obviously sanitizer dispensers throughout the airport. As I said, safety is our priority. It is paramount in this business. Our COVID safe plan has been worked through with SA Health and was very early on. We had SA Health here at the terminal working with us through a number of issues quite early on in the piece. And recently, of course, with the implementation of COVID marshals, all of our retail businesses have adopted that requirement in terms of COVID marshals. So the terminal is a pretty safe place, and for anyone travelling through it, whilst it looks a completely different terminal these days with a bit of construction hoarding and quite a high police presence, it is still it's still a good place to transit and go through. I'll move on to slide 2 just very briefly to outline what is Adelaide Airport's vision, and that is to be the gateway for South Australian passengers and provide great connectivity for freight, South Australia or Adelaide Airport, the businesses at Adelaide Airport contribute something in the order of $2 billion to South Australia's economy each year, which is around 2.3% of the state's GDP. And we continue, even now, to improve and upgrade our facilities to ensure the start and the end of their passenger journey is smooth and seamless and safe. I'll talk a little bit more about the terminal expansion at the end of the presentation. Jonathan will take us through the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks again, Sean and Kathy, for inviting us to share our flight track to recovery on our plans at the moment. So I thought for this section, the first section, we talk about, you know, our successes, our performance pre-COVID-19 levels. So if you look into our table in terms of our performance, you will realize that we are actually achieving a 10% international passenger growth for 12 months ending December 2019. I think it's actually worth highlighting that, you know, we actually achieve a capacity growth on the international front at 7%. What that means is whatever new capacity that we've managed to convince the airlines to put into our market has actually responded really well to it. They have reacted to it, and it's more about filling the new seats with bumps on seats. This performance can be reflected in our domestic and regional numbers as well. We have outperformed in terms of our PAX growth versus our capacity growth. The source of this capacity and passenger growth is a result of Singapore Airlines. They have introduced Adelaide as a global launch port for the A350 medium-haul aircraft. And on this note, I think South Australia deserves a pat on the shoulder because we are actually convincing a legacy carrier, an international-wide big carrier, to actually deploy the new next generation aircraft to the Adelaide market. We also achieved this growth due to Malindo introducing 4 flights a week to Adelaide, Bali, Kuala Lumpur. We've got additional flights from China Southern, Cathay, and Singapore Airlines on a seasonal basis as well. Domestically, we have achieved good growth, capacity growth from our national carriers as well, which in a way, if you look into our first half of FY20, the 6 months before we hit the pandemic, we actually achieved an international passenger growth of 15%. That's a huge number, and a domestic growth of 3%. So pre-COVID, we were on, you know, cloud 9. Everything was rosy. Everything was actually tracking really well. But I think it's worth mentioning that, you know, as much as we want capacity growth, we actually apply a very disciplined approach in terms of achieving capacity growth. What we do as the airport, working together with our stakeholders, is to apply a very disciplined approach, a mathematical and scientific approach in terms of achieving the capacity growth so that we can actually achieve the passenger growth that airlines wants to see. It's more about trying to avoid any cannibalization to our existing markets and existing airlines. What we want to do is actually grow the pie bigger and drive more traffic volumes instead of shifting shares from an airline to another airline with the same size of the pie.
Thanks, Jonathan. We're on slide 5 now. This is just a little infograph that sets out, I guess, the building blocks of recovery for us. We'll just bring up the right slide. There we go. Thank you. Obviously, tourism is a massive part of our business and of the traffic through Adelaide, as well as education, business events, and very important air freight in the belly of the aircraft. So, as Jonathan's just mentioned, in terms of the way we go about business development, it's very much a Team Adelaide approach, joining with people such as TICSA, the South Australian Tourism Commission, Department of Trade and Investment, Study Adelaide, the Adelaide Convention Bureau, and the South Australian Freight Council, amongst others, has really what's been building the aviation capacity here in South Australia. Tourism, as we know, is a massive economic generator, 7.9 billion, 39,000 jobs. education in large export 614 million, and it's interesting to note in 2019 the value of South Australian exports by air was as I said 614 million. Only a few years before that, in 2010, and prior to Emirates, Qatar and China Southern operating out of Adelaide, the total export value was only around 330 million. So you can see there's been quite a big jump, and that's because of the frequency and the range and scope of the aircraft that are flying, and the fact that pre-COVID we had over 309 international airlines flying to 8 destinations direct, with one stop to 300 plus destinations around the world. That's not only good for passengers, that's fantastic for South Australian exporters. And business events, of course, a very large part of the market, valued at around 260 million and creating 2,000 jobs.
So I think on the next section,
Thanks, Sean.
what we're going to do is to talk about the shock period, the COVID-19 shock, how, you know, as a business, how are we being impacted, how airlines have quickly, restructured their networks.
So as the slide says, we've seen immediately, virtually almost straight away, a massive decline in our business. I know that we are talking today to many people in this presentation who have also been similarly hit by this pandemic. Our business dropped by 96% in terms of passenger numbers and aeronautical revenue. We've seen that pretty well repeated throughout other parts of our non-aeronautical business, such as our property management and property development arms of the company, around about 80% drop in revenue. A lot of the businesses here at the airport obviously are connected to aviation, but there are also businesses who are simply here because the airport business district is well located, well connected in terms of into the Adelaide Road network, and we offer pretty good value in terms of property here at the airport. So there are lots of other businesses here who don't have a direct aviation focus, but they have also nonetheless been heavily impacted. That said, there are some businesses that have done reasonably well to this point, which is encouraging. But you can see from the slide there, 96% drop in our traffic numbers. We lost all of our international airlines, and we now have Qatar and Singapore back, and I think Jonathan will cover that in a little while. And we had something like 500 domestic flights per week to every major capital city and many regional destinations throughout Australia and South Australia. We had over 500 flights per week, and we're presently sitting at around about 95, and that's only picked up really in the last few weeks. We were hoping for a little bit more by now, but the Victorian border closures, or the maintenance of the border closure against Victoria, New South Wales and ACT has put a bit more of a handbrake on what we were hoping to see in terms of recovery by now. But we'll talk in a moment about what our recovery trajectory is going to be.
So following up from what Mark mentioned about the suspended routes, just on international, Air New Zealand has suspended our Auckland service. We've got 3 to 5 flights a week to China South, with China South to Guangzhou, that's suspended. Singapore Airlines on daily flights, that's suspended. Malaysia Airlines on 5 flights a week, we've suspended. Same as daily flights to Dubai on Emirates, daily flights to Doha on Qatar Airways, and we've got flights to Bali with Malindo and Jetstar. They've all suspended during the initial stage of the pandemic. What we can see then is a flow-on effect to our domestic network. At the start of towards the mid-end of March, you start to realize that Qantas have suspended all 8 of our interstate routes. So they operate 8 interstate routes to Adelaide. They suspended all of those routes. Jetstar, they operate 10 routes from here. They've suspended 9, just keeping Melbourne. Virgin Australia, they operate 7 routes in Adelaide. They've suspended all 7 routes. But this is where we're sort of trying to focus at the moment. Our priority at the moment is focusing on regrowing our domestic network, rebounding our domestic network. So at the moment, what you can see from this slide is Qantas. They have reinstated 7 out of the 8 routes, but recently they have actually canned Sydney and Melbourne, so dropping it down to 5. But we are very confident that once travel restrictions are lifted, Qantas will operate Sydney, Melbourne again. Jetstar, they have reinstated 7 routes. The only 3 routes that's not being reinstated at the moment is Perth, Sunshine Coast, and Avalon, and we are working closely with our stakeholders to try to get that reinstated. Virgin Australia, they have reinstated 6 of the 7 routes, but recently they have suspended Gold Coast, but we're confident that we can get it back. And also at the moment, they're not operating into Canberra. Tiger Air, as a result of call it a Virgin 2.0, they will no longer be operating. So I think it's worth giving a bit of a context about how that recovery is looking at the moment. You know, how Mark was mentioning, you know, our domestic flights, interstate flights, we've got about 500 return flights a week pre-COVID. We are now achieving about 95 return flights a week. Regional flights, we have about 235 flights a week pre-COVID. Of the 235 return flights a week, we are now capturing about 100 flights a week. So regional traffic is actually recovering quicker than our interstate traffic at the moment. And then in terms of our international, we used to have about 53 return flights a week. We are now only capturing 3 return flights a week. So we have 2 flights on Qatar Airways, which they commence on the 16th of August, departs every Thursday and Sunday. We've got Singapore Airlines once a week, and we've got Malaysia Airlines once a month service.
Can I just ask a question there, Jonathan? This may be a question of ignorance. The government obviously initially provides significant subsidies for flight aviation activity. I know the state government's provided assistance with freight activity. How much of the current aviation activity that's coming into the airport is being supported by government subsidies?
Every domestic flight that is coming in here is being supported by the federal government. Assistance is being provided to airlines. Airports have not been the beneficiary of any bespoke support, other than, as every other business, we've qualified for the JobKeeper program, which we've obviously applied for and we're in the middle of. Might just add to Jonathan about that regional stuff. It looks good, you know, it's 50% of the previous volumes, but what's happened is that's largely being supported by fly-in, fly-out traffic. And what we've seen is an increase in flights because of social distancing on flights, but not a commensurate increase in passenger traffic recovery. What that has meant, and the stats that Jonathan set out about the 95 domestic flights a week, 3 international flights a week, and the regionals that we get, is that we've been able to open up on a very limited basis a couple of 2-3 of the retail operations in the terminal. They were completely closed from March through to probably, I think, early June, when we opened up 1 or 2. So we've got a handful that are opening now. As I said, basically food and beverage and travel essential type stuff, and for limited periods of time, just to cope with, just to provide some limited service to people. So our retailers in the terminal are have been significantly impacted. I think we'll move to slide 10 now and just talk about freight. I talked earlier about some of the freight stuff and what happens in when we get additional services in terms of dollars. In tonnes, we were doing in 2010 about 70 tonnes a week. Pre-COVID, we were doing around about 160 tonnes a week, and as of now, that's come down very significantly, because we have one dedicated freighter from Singapore Airlines, and we also now thankfully have 2 services a week from Qatar. We're putting a big focus behind both of those airlines because they represent the best opportunity for South Australian exporters to get their freight into Asia and via Doha into Europe, but they're also airlines that we see as being airlines that we can build some sort of recovery off the back of. That's not to gloss over in any way, shape or form, though, the Malaysian Airlines flight, but at the moment we have a 1 a month flight, and Cathay, we have a weekly freighter from Cathay. Hopefully in due course we can convert those into some form of passenger, even if it's passenger repatriation. But it's Singapore and Qatar that are doing all of the passenger repatriation at the moment, and they represent vital freight lines. We were very fortunate working with Department of Trade and Investment and with Austrade through the IFAM, the Industry Freight Adjustment Mechanism, to get support for freight for both the Singapore and the Cathay freighters, and also most recently for the Qatar freighter. And as a result of that support, Qatar, who were originally only going to fly a 6-week program, are now flying a 12-week program twice a week, Thursday and a Sunday, although it ought not come as a shock if Qatar pull their Sunday service and just stop at the Thursday 1 a week. We'd be very grateful for that service, and that's really what we're focused on, is retaining that Thursday service. So to the extent that anybody on this call has any influence, to be able to encourage our South Australian exporters, but more particularly the freight forwarding companies that package up the freight and get it out by air, it is vitally important that the services that are direct out of Adelaide, that Qatar flight and the Singapore and the Cathay flight, are supported directly. If that freight dries up, those services will go. So I can only, make the point. It is vital that those flights are supported. Passengers are not paying their way; they are repatriation. When I say paying their way, that's not that the airline is running that as very marginal business. It's all about the freight. That is really what they're aiming for.
The next section that we're going to talk about is, our flight track towards recovery. I think everyone is actually asking that golden question: where is the recovery? Where is the light at the end of this tunnel? My suggestion, my advice is not to sort of wait for the light to come into this tunnel, but to actually bring your own torchlight to find an escape from this tunnel. So I think we'll kickstart about how are we planning towards recovery.
That was a wonderful analogy. So just at the high level, Jonathan will take us through some more of the detail and put some batteries on in the torch. I'm not going to continue that analogy. But just at the high level, our best realistic planning case around domestic recovery is that we are planning to see around 30 to 40% recovery in domestic passenger levels by the end of the calendar year this year. There's a lot that needs to happen for that to happen as well in terms of borders. We don't see domestic capacity returning to 2019 levels, so pre-COVID levels, until the middle towards the end of 2023. And at which point we'll be about 4 years behind where we thought we were going to be at that point. And it's not about us, it's not about our numbers, but it's about what those numbers mean in terms of the knock-on economic impacts for economic development, freight, trade, and tourism, to the extent that we will continue and need to rely on at least domestic interstate tourism. We don't see any return to international this calendar year. We see by the middle of the year next year, maybe Trans-Tasman service, which would see potentially around 5% recovery in international passenger volumes. And pre-COVID levels for international, we don't see getting back to 2019 levels until mid to late 2024. That's our planning case, and we continue to review that regularly. At this stage, we appear to be tracking reasonably well against that planning case, although, as I said, the Victorian border closure and the maintenance of the New South Wales ACT border closures has meant that our planning case of a few months ago, we are now not achieving. We're flying slightly underneath that. I'll get Jonathan to take us through the next few slides just to sort of take a deeper dive into some of that information.
Thanks, Mark. So I'll start off with the top chart. The top chart actually shows our international traffic movements. So the black line shows FY20 numbers. So July, against the green line of FY19 numbers. We are actually tracking at a 15% passenger growth year on year. So everything was actually tracking really well till, I won't actually forget this data, the 11th of February, a few days before Valentine's Day, where China Southern operated their last flight and suspended the service. And everything went downhill from there. It's like a domino block. Everything just started to fall apart, where, towards the end of March, all our international carriers have suspended our services. And that's when, in June, Singapore Airlines began to operate once a week repatriation flights. And we start to, from a business perspective, we try to look into ways to, as I said, find ways to actually look into the recovery side and things in advance. So we actually work really closely with, the Department of Trade and Investment. We work with, SATC, Convention Bureau, to look into sort of a forward planning about how can we actually recover our international numbers. And as Mark said, what we're trying to do is on a every financial year perspective, achieve a target and achieve that 100% recovery by FY24. On the bottom chart, you'll see our domestic numbers and how we were tracking. We were tracking, at a 3%, year-on-year growth until things tanked in the middle of March when airlines started to pull services, suspended their routes, and we are starting to see a bit more traction about getting flights domestically once travel restrictions are lifted. One of the strategy to be totally open up with you guys about our domestic recovery. It's we do have like a strategy paper that we produce on a yearly basis, and we sort of cater it. We review it on a quarterly basis to see if we need to tweak and change our strategy paper. But for this short period, things are actually different. So what we do is we are actually trying to target recovery domestically, where we change our strategy, approach on a weekly basis, because if a state closes its border, what we need to do is quickly reach out to the airlines to try to shift growth to another state that is actually open up for travel between Adelaide to their state. So if I look into the next slide, I think I am really excited to talk about this slide. We're talking about international recovery. This image actually shows where our international traffic movements are coming from. You will see the majority of our international traffic is actually traveling from Asia. That's 51% of the part. The second largest part is Europe, 23%, followed by New Zealand and then the Americas. We have about 868,000 pax movements from Asia, with a huge growth of 9% year on year. The inbound split is about 36%, which means for Asia, what you guys are expecting pre-COVID-19 was about 326,000 inbound passenger movements coming to from Asia. Europe, there's about 156,000 inbound tax movements. New Zealand, there's about 75,000 inbound tax movements. America, about 57,000 tax movements. And these are the markets which are achieving huge growth. And I think it's worth pausing here for a minute and acknowledge all the stakeholders and to thank all the stakeholders who actually drive this growth for us pre-COVID-19. I know South Australia Tourism Commission, SATC, have done a tremendous job in terms of raising the destination awareness of South Australia internationally. They have been really creative and hardworking in terms of running creative marketing collaterals, marketing campaigns to try to drive international visitation into South Australia. At the same time, Adelaide Convention Bureau has been just fantastic. The Adelaide Convention Bureau managed to secure a lot of business events through Adelaide and is raising Adelaide as a business event destination. Not forgetting Department of Trade and Investment, who has been, supporting us to try to get us through this short period. And, the other two stakeholders that I would really like to thank is TIPSA and the industry, you guys yourselves. What we as the airport team Adelaide could do is to try to raise the destination of Adelaide to the world. We run marketing campaigns to try to get new capacity, new airlines to operate to Adelaide. But it's about you guys, the industry, who actually give the visitors the exceptional experience where they will actually become South Australia's ambassador to market how wonderful, how beautiful it is to come to Adelaide. And for that, we thank you all for that. So just moving on to the next slide. We talk about the international visitation. 614,000 international inbound visitors. 70% is actually traveling for leisure, VFR, visiting friends and relatives. 30% is actually traveling into South Australia as trade, business minds, and education traffic. And the trigger points for us in terms of international recovery, like what Mark said, is target the right airlines to actually give us the better chance to recover. Like Singapore Airlines, we need them to remain its presence. Qatar Airways, we talk about the Trans-Tasman bubble, and New Zealand will be important for us. I think just to share a bit of our strategy of flight trackers recovery for international, domestic, regional, they are all important to us. There's no one that is actually more important than the other. International, interstate, intrastate, they are all important to us. It's important for us to actually make sure at the moment we ensure that we work with the airline partners to put Adelaide as a dot in their network map. Because the chances of them putting a dot into their airline's network map means that there is a higher chance of people wanting to fly to Adelaide because of the non-stop service. The option of the non-stop service is key to its recovery, and we have to make sure that all international domestic carriers, even regional carriers that we speak to, they continue to have Adelaide at the back of their mind at their network map. That's key towards recovery. I think the other bit that is worth mentioning is about how are we going to progress from here to there. I think I've mentioned just now, domestic, we are tracking how travel restrictions are sort of reacting on a weekly basis. Internationally, you will see quite a bit of news about Qatar Airways freight staff. We need SA, local, freight forwarders, producers, exporters to support ex-Adelaide flights, even on the Singapore Airlines flight. But at the same time, it is about doing things behind the scene that not many people know. So for example, what we've done is to create a confidence of travel again. So Mark has shared in the beginning of the presentation that we're doing quite a bit through the COVID Safe Plan to look after the well-being of our travelers. It's about giving them the confidence that we are traveling at a safe environment, and airlines are doing the same, where they're promoting a lot about their HEPA filters, where they can actually capture the 99.6% of the microbes and recycled air filters in the plane, which is safe to travel on the plane. And arriving to the other airport, which will implement another COVID safe plan, which means the confidence of air travel is there because safety is our priority. And we are doing quite a bit in terms of giving the confidence to the airlines that there is a staged growth towards recovery. We've done surveys, asking, South Australians whether they want to travel when travel restrictions are lifted, whether it is internationally and domestically. And majority, 80% of the respondents have actually mentioned that, once travel restrictions are lifted within the 6 to 8 months period, they want to travel. That means people will travel. I think the biggest thing I can share is do not lose hope. I know hope is not a strategy, but do not lose hope, because that's what we can bank on. And believe in pent-up demand. There is a lot of pent-up demand when travel restrictions are lifted. People want to travel somewhere. And I think Mark is going to share with you where that pent-up demand is looking.
The next slide is something that we put together just as an analysis of nation states who haven't had internal border closures. And you can see from this graphic the way in which their domestic traffic has recovered. We've also plotted Australia's performance in that infographic. Now, I have to say at the outset, I believe that the way in which our state has dealt with the border closures has been exemplary. It's been clearly communicated, and it has been necessarily cautious and based on health advice, and it has been, as I say, I think it's been exemplary in terms of what's happened around the nation. But we are coming to the time where you can see from that infographic where the artificiality of borders is suppressing domestic travel and therefore domestic economic activity, and that the risk management of this health pandemic, or the focus ought to shift to one that is managing the locality and managing the cluster against approved and agreed KPIs and benchmarks, both in terms of the ramp up of the way in which it's managed and the ramp down. But the rest of the country should be free to trade with each other. That's the key to seeing our graph move somewhat towards those other nation states who haven't had that artificial borders within their own country. It's clear, it's factual, and we do look forward to there being some form of nationally adopted approach around managing COVID with a risk-based approach that's around just managing the cluster and the geographic region of that cluster. That could span the state borders for all of that matters. It's really clamping down on those areas in a pre-agreed and preset way, so that there's clarity of going in and there's clarity about when you come out, and then let the rest of the country trade. The other big feature here is, when we ultimately get back to it, is this concept of an international health passport. We, along with other airports through our industry association, are working on proposals with medical consultants to put forward a plan that would, a proposal around the potential for an international health passport. This would see a passenger getting a test perhaps 10 or 12 days prior to their departure, having that test result, presumably negative, linked to their itinerary, their PNR, and linked to their passport, having a further health check 48 hours prior to departure and arrival at the airport. The airline checks them in and does the usual checks they do around that passenger information that's linked to that PNR, which is their passport number, but it will also include their health results. They get on their flight. There's further assessment made of those passengers whilst they're in flight on their way to Australia, and on arrival, we know who is arriving, we know what their health status is, presumably it's negative because otherwise they wouldn't have been checked in, and then they're free to enter the country and perhaps isolate for, say, another 48 hours until they get a further negative test, but remove the 14-day quarantine requirement. Now, there's a lot to go to make that happen, but we have to start with a concept, we have to start with a proposal. It needs to be well-founded in health advice, and it needs to be at least nationally, if not internationally, adopted. So that's something that we're working on, and we're really excited about the prospect of having 300. There's about 4,000 or 5,000 students that need to come back. These are kids who are halfway through their study. They've paid their fees. They want to. They know and love Adelaide and South Australia. They want to return, and we're really excited to participate in and do whatever we can to facilitate that. The really important thing here is not so, is about this year, but the really important thing here is about those students who want to enrol next year and the year after. And they're making those decisions, and their parents are making those decisions as a family, in the next little while. And what we don't want, what we do want, is for South Australia to be regarded as a very real and legitimate and safe option for those students to enrol next year and the year after. So we're doing whatever it is that we can to get in behind that. I'll briefly turn to terminal expansion on the next slide and then hold it for questions. We've continued with our terminal expansion project. We've been able to make some gains in terms of time because there's not been too many passengers around. It's a bit like the Monty Python sketch where you run the best hospital in Northern England, but they haven't got any patients. We've been able to make some good time savings and get work on a lot of different fronts behind construction hoardings, expanded construction hoardings within the terminal, and that will see the project finish up around late next year. A little bit of clean up and tidy up into the following year. We will see quite a lot of the proposed retail open up, but there will be some areas of the retail now that will need to convert to different spaces, and they'll have a different focus than what was originally intended until there is a better outlook for retail for those sorts of products. We're talking things here about fashion type, high-end products, but certainly food and beverage, travel essentials, news and books, and all of those things will be there as we slowly start opening up the terminal. So it's good that our shareholders have been very supportive, and our banks have been very supportive of our business as we've had to cut our cloth, as they say, to suit our circumstances. But we have sufficient liquidity to be able to carry through, finish off that project, and for us to weather this storm for as long as it takes. So I'll hold there. Thank you. We do acknowledge the industry. We acknowledge that the tourism and hospitality sectors have been massively hit here. Our business is no different. We're doing as best as we can to help provide that sort of flight track to recovery. And sessions like this are really important to us because it enables us to speak openly and share information, and hopefully you've received something out of it today. So Jonathan and I will stop there now and hand back to Sean and just take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jonathan. That's been very informative. I've learned a lot myself. I'm sure everyone else has. We've got a number of questions in the chat room. Rather than read them out, I might just ask Felicity, you're the first person, Chinta Tours. Do you just want to come off mute and ask your question to Mark and Jonathan? I think you might have two questions, Felicity.
Yes, I do. My first question is the hygiene standards that you've set for the main terminal at Adelaide Airport, will they be extended to the general aviation terminal? As an air charter operator, we've noticed an increase in the request for private charter flights. People don't want to board a crowded flight as we emerge from COVID. And I'm just looking to see what sort of reassurance we can get to see what sort of cleaning procedures will be happening at the general aviation terminal. That's my first question.
maybe we'll just stop there, Felicity. Let's give Mark and Jonathan a chance to respond, and then we'll go to the second question.
Thanks, Felicity. Our operations team are providing the appropriate level of support, health, hygiene in that GA terminal commensurate with demand. If there's specific information or a specific detail that you'd like to discuss further, please feel free to reach out to me, and we will get a direct response back to you. But we've approached all of our terminals with the same principle and the same philosophy.
Okay. With the figures of the passenger movements that were quoted as part of the presentation, did that include general aviation, or did that only include regular public transport, such as Regional Express or Qantas?
It'll just be regular RPP services.
We don't get passenger information declared to us by GA, so it's not something that we're capable of tracking. However, RPT traffic, regular passenger transport traffic, such as Rex and Qantas Link, they declare their passenger numbers to us, so that's something that we're able to track.
And my final question, with the terminal expansion, in 2019, it was relatively common at various times of the day to have quite lengthy delays between check-in and boarding, and those delays were caused by the delays of going through security. So as you're expanding the terminal, is there going to be an expansion? This is the main terminal. Is there going to be an expansion in the number of security scanners that are operating? Are there going to be an increase in the number of security guards who are part of that processing? Yeah, the delays at times to get through security were really quite concerning. And I know that security is an important part of travelling with travelling on the airlines. I'm not suggesting in any way that there should be any diminution, but just perhaps are you looking at more efficient ways to process the passenger numbers?
Those passenger or those security processes that you're referring to, Felicity, are monitored by the minute. We run that to an IATA level of standard, which is passenger wait times will not exceed in the 95th percentile any more than 10 minutes. And we meet that standard every day, every minute of every day. There are times when the queue, pre-19, when the queue looked long, but it constantly moved. And we do monitor that both with CCTV and our own surveys. There are times very early, or used to be times very early on a Monday morning, where it didn't look good, but as I said, the queue did move quite constantly. That said, we're not. We do our utmost to make that security and our passenger experience as seamless and as convenient as possible. We made a number of improvements to the security throat area last year and the year prior. We've doubled the size of the processing capacity. However, we're constantly running to increasing regulation and increasing needs for intervention. That's, we're required to do that and comply with federal government security regulations. So for the foreseeable future, I actually see those processing times as getting a little bit worse before they get better. The whole industry and COVID in a way has brought this forward to an even greater degree, which is a good thing, around having touchless travel. And the whole industry is focused around technology that can make that process touchless, where you just walk through. You don't actually go through an X-ray area, or you don't think you are anyway. And we're hopeful that in time that technology will be available to the extent that it is affordable in terms of the total overall cost to the passenger of travel, and that it will achieve its desired outcome. The point that you raise about the terminal expansion and are we addressing it, the answer to that question is yes. However, it will still be managed to internationally recognised service level standards that are set by IATA.
Thanks, Mark. Anthony Coles, would you like to come off mute and ask your question, make your comment?
Hey guys, thanks for the presentation, fantastic. Yeah, the question was just regarding the tools and the technology. We're bringing in some robotic technology for the hotel sector, which has got scans for temperature testing and also for disinfecting. And yeah, so the question was, great to hear about the discussion about the technology with the health passport, but is there an opportunity to pilot some projects to test the impact and the knock-on effect of some of these technologies?
Happy to talk to you about you doing that as a gratis trial in the terminal at any time, Anthony, so please reach out to me.
Great, mate, thanks.
Thanks, Anthony. There's no more questions on the chat room. I'll close today's session at that point. Thanks so much, Mark. Thanks so much, Jonathan. The information you provided has been absolutely first rate. I think it's great to hear that your plans and your understanding of where we're at. Obviously, the future prosperity and tourism in this state is so intrinsically linked to our aviation capacity and our aviation health. The border issue is an incredibly challenging one. And I think, as you pointed out, Mark, we are very fortunate to be here. We've had a very much a balanced and pragmatic approach from our government, and you can't say that for jurisdictions around the country. So I think we're lucky to live in Australia, and we're even luckier to live in South Australia. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks again for having us in your boardroom today, gentlemen. All the best to everyone. Enjoy the day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.